In the dusty heart of New Mexico's high desert, where the wind whispered secrets through the mesquite and the sun bled fire across the sky each evening, lived a man who had long forgotten what it meant to feel alive. His name was Samuel Briggs, a rancher with hands hardened by work, eyes dulled by solitude, and a soul weathered by grief. For 15 years, he had lived alone on his ranch, miles from the nearest town. His only company the creak of the windmill and the restless cattle. His wife had died young, taken by fever, and his son, barely grown, had run off east, chasing a life beyond the endless dust. One morning in early spring, Samuel saddled his horse before dawn. The air was cool, and the land glowed faintly silver under a fading moon. He had set out to mend the southern fence line. Coyotes had gotten through the night before. But as he rode deeper into the arroyo, something strange caught his eye. The crows were circling low, their cries sharp and restless. And beneath them, near a gnarled cottonwood that leaned like a broken arm over the dry creek, something hung in the wind. He slowed his horse. The closer he came, the clearer it became, a shape swaying gently. Human. Samuel's stomach twisted. He dismounted, boots crunching against the cracked ground. The figure was that of a young woman, no older than 18. Her dark hair hung in loose braids, and her feet barely brushed the sand. She wore a torn buckskin dress, the kind of the Apache tribes that lived north of the ridge. Around her neck, a rope dug deep into her skin. But what froze Samuel's blood was the sign tied to her chest with a thin strip of leather. The words, scrawled in rough black paint, read, "White man don't forgive." For a long moment, Samuel just stood there, the wind tugging at his coat. He'd seen death before, Indians killed by settlers, settlers killed by Indians, but this was different. This was personal, deliberate. He could see from her bruises she hadn't been dead long. Maybe half a day. He cut her down carefully, laying her in the shade of the cottonwood. Her skin was still warm beneath the chill of dawn. He noticed then the faintest rise of her chest. She was alive. Samuel knelt quickly, checking her pulse. Faint, but there. He poured water from his canteen over her lips, and she stirred, moaning weakly. When her eyes fluttered open, they were the color of the desert after rain, dark, fierce, and full of pain. She tried to speak, but her throat caught. Samuel hushed her gently. "You're safe now," he murmured. "Don't try to talk." He lifted her onto his horse and rode hard back to the ranch. For days, she drifted between life and death. Samuel nursed her like a man possessed, cleaning her wounds, feeding her broth, whispering words of comfort she likely didn't understand. She spoke Apache, and he spoke only a few words, just enough to recognize her tribe's markings. He learned her name from a necklace she wore, Taya. Each night, he sat by her bed, staring into the fire. The sign haunted him. "White man don't forgive." The message wasn't just a warning, it was a curse. Someone had done this to make a statement. To make sure anyone who found her would know this was vengeance. But vengeance for what? When Taya finally awoke fully, her eyes darted around the small cabin like a cornered animal. Samuel stepped back, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe," he said softly. "You were hurt. I found you." She didn't answer. She only stared at him, her gaze sharp, guarded, but not entirely without recognition. Over the following days, she regained her strength slowly. She refused to eat at first, pushing away every bowl he offered. But one night, after he left a plate by her bed and stepped outside to check the corral, he returned to find it empty. That was the first small truce between them. Time passed, and Taya began to move around the cabin. She said little, but her eyes followed Samuel as he worked. She watched him chop wood, mend saddles, milk the cow. There was curiosity in her silence, a fragile thread of trust forming between them. One evening, when the sun bled out behind the mountains, Samuel caught her standing by the barn, staring at the horizon. "You've got people out there?" he asked gently. "Your tribe." She turned to him slowly and said her first English words, voice raspy and soft. "All gone." Samuel nodded, feeling a hollow ache in his chest. He knew that pain too well, the kind of loss that burned so deep it left you half a ghost. Bit by bit, she told her story, not in one sitting, but in fragments scattered over days. Her family had been living peacefully along the Rio Puerco when a group of men, white men from a nearby settlement, raided their camp, accusing them of stealing horses. They burned the tents, shot her father, and took her captive. She didn't know how long she'd been held. The men had drunk heavily, laughed cruelly, and when they were done, they hung her with a sign, to send a message to the neighboring Apache band. Samuel's jaw clenched as he listened. He'd known there was hatred still simmering in those parts, old grudges from wars no one remembered the reasons for. But this was evil. He swore then that he would find who did it. That night, after Taya had gone to sleep, he saddled his horse again and rode toward town. The settlement of Dry Creek was a rough place, half saloon, half dust. The men who ran it fancied themselves lawmen, though most were little more than bandits with badges. Samuel hadn't been there in months, but he knew where to start asking questions. At the saloon, he found them, 3 men sitting by the bar, laughing loud, their boots muddy from the trail. He recognized one immediately. Clay Dugan, a ranch hand who'd worked for him years ago before getting run off for stealing whiskey. Now Clay wore a revolver and a sneer that didn't belong to an honest man. Samuel ordered a drink, keeping to himself. But when he overheard Clay say, "She swung just fine, like a wind chime in the desert," something inside Samuel snapped. He slammed his glass down. The saloon went silent. "You talking about the Apache girl?" he said, voice low. Clay smirked. "What's it to you, old man?" Samuel didn't answer. He just swung. His fist connected with Clay's jaw, sending him crashing into the bar. The other 2 lunged, but Samuel drew his revolver faster than they could blink. "You tell me who else was there," he growled, "or you'll be joining her in that tree." Fear flickered in their eyes. One spat out a name, Sheriff Havers. Samuel lowered the gun slowly, disgust rising in his throat. The sheriff. The man sworn to keep order. He left them trembling and rode out before dawn, rage burning like fire in his veins. When he returned to the ranch, Taya was waiting by the door. She saw the blood on his knuckles and the storm in his eyes. "You found them," she said quietly. "Not yet," he replied. "But I will." Over the next few weeks, word spread. The sheriff came looking for Samuel, claiming he'd assaulted his men. But Samuel was ready. He'd written a letter to the army outpost at Fort Stanton, naming every man involved, describing what they'd done. The soldiers came within days. The sheriff and his men were arrested and taken away under guard. When it was over, Samuel felt no triumph. Just emptiness. Justice in the West was a fragile thing. Sometimes it came too late to matter. Taya stayed. The days turned warmer, and with them came a strange peace. She helped with the animals, learned to bake bread in his old stove, even laughed once when a stubborn mule kicked over a water bucket. For the first time in years, Samuel felt something like joy stirring again, a quiet, cautious kind of hope. One evening, as the stars spilled across the sky, Taya sat beside him on the porch. The night smelled of sage and smoke. "You could go back north," he said. "There's land your people once lived on. I could help you get there." She shook her head. No land left. No people left. He looked at her then, seeing not the broken girl he'd found under the cottonwood, but a woman of strength, fierce and unyielding like the land itself. "You got a place here if you want it," he said softly. Her eyes met his. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she nodded. The months rolled on. The ranch began to change with their shared labor. New fences, repaired barns, a garden that actually grew. Taya taught Samuel the old Apache ways of reading the weather and listening to the land. He taught her to ride, to shoot, to speak the language of the settlers without fear. Yet, even as life returned to the ranch, the past lingered like a shadow. Sometimes, Taya would wake screaming in the night, clutching her throat. Samuel would hold her until she calmed, whispering, "You're safe. No one will hurt you again." One summer evening, they rode together to the cottonwood tree where he'd found her. The rope marks were still faintly visible on the bark. Taya stood there for a long while, silent. Then she took out a small pouch of ashes, her father's, and scattered them to the wind. "This place not curse," she said at last. "It's where I lived again." Samuel's throat tightened. When they rode home that night, hand in hand, the desert seemed softer somehow, the stars closer, the wind no longer whispering of loss but of peace. Years later, travelers passing through the region would speak of the Briggs Ranch as a strange place, where a white rancher and an Apache woman lived side by side, tending the land, raising horses, and treating all who came with kindness. Some said it was haunted, that the spirits of the old wars still lingered there. Others said it was blessed. But those who looked closely could see the truth. In a land built on vengeance and pain, two broken souls had found a way to forgive, not just each other, but the world that had wronged them both. And though the cottonwood tree still stood, weathered and gray, no sign hung from its branches anymore. Only the whisper of the wind through its leaves, carrying the memory of what had been lost, and the quiet promise of what had been found.